I was not surprised because Clarence Thomas has been on a mission to dismantle every institutional attempt to help and aid not just Black people, but any people who have been disadvantaged in this society since he's gotten on the court. He, like Samuel Alito, appears to operate from a kind of rage, a sort of cold rage against the entire 20th century, the second half of the 20th century, which they find to be an affront to their own self-image and to their image of America as this country that is noble and that has always been noble and whose slave-holding founders were noble and really hated slavery and were just so pained at the fact that they had to own all these people.
Oh boy. Oh, would you like to know why the discourse in our country is broken? It's because the people who are having that discourse are not very bright. Look at CNN. They're having a conversation about the affirmative action ruling at the Supreme Court, and they're so angry about it, they can't even see straight. And that leads them to putting people on who are unprepared for the conversation, and they find themselves getting completely outshone by a young man who's an activist in college. This woman has no business having this conversation if this is how ill-prepared she is. She is speaking with one of the student activists for the group that sued and successfully got the Supreme Court case overturned, and she has no clue. And you got to give this guy credit. He has no respect for her, and it is fantastic. Let's check it out.
So today's ruling obviously is one that you were hoping for, arguing that the rules in place that support affirmative action were unfair to Asian Americans. So from a practical perspective, how does today's decision help Asian American students looking to get into elite colleges?
I just want to say I'm ecstatic about this decision. It means that Asian Americans can finally get treated on their merits. Guys, we know why Asian Americans should get into Harvard at disproportionate rates. It's because they study twice as many hours as the average American. It's not because of their race. It's because of their culture. It's because of their family values. Academic excellence, that should be prioritized. Those should be the values that schools like Harvard and Chapel Hill, supposedly elite schools and academic programs, should be valuing in an applicant, not race.
I got to give him props here. He didn't take her stupid bait. The obvious answer is it does away with the things that were punishing Asian Americans. I mean, that's pretty simple. So he makes the point that it should be about performance. And the reason Asians are getting in at higher rate or should be getting in at higher rates is quite simple. And everyone knows it. Not a single person is surprised by this. It's a cultural thing. I know we like to pretend that all cultures are equal, but they're not. It's clear that it's not. And this guy's having none of it. Kudos to him. She is still outclassed by a million miles and can't even remotely respond to that point.
So you've argued also that Harvard and other colleges should get rid of their legacy admissions, which also gives people points for having a parent that went to that school. That's not happening here. I wonder why not challenge that, which is also presumptively an obstacle for Asian Americans being treated fairly in the admissions process.
Well, I hope you followed the case, but Students for Fair Admissions has challenged legacy admissions repeatedly over and over again. In fact, we argued that the way that Harvard could implement some of their diversity policies without discriminating against Asian Americans is to get rid of legacy admissions, which, as you know, disproportionately privilege white applicants. In fact, 33% of Harvard students who are white are legacy, and they have a 5 times more likely chance of getting in if you are legacy. So you really want to ensure diversity in admissions? Get rid of legacy admissions.
She's 0 for 2. No clue what's going on here. No clue who these people are. No clue what they're up to. But what she knows is affirmative action good, ending affirmative action bad. And she has no case outside of that simplistic, moronic argument.
You heard today President Biden expressing some concerns over socioeconomic factors and inequality being made worse given this decision. He also presented what he called basically a way forward. I wonder if you take race out of the picture and you do what the president is suggesting, taking socioeconomic status into consideration, do you think that that would be fair to Asian American students as well?
No, I don't. I think that admissions should be only based on merit. And the reason why is because why are we asking a university to calculate somebody's level of adversity? I think that sets a very bad precedent for anybody trying to get into college. We should be treated on the basis of our merits. We should be treated on the basis of how hard we work, our study, our SAT scores, our grades. A name-blind, race-blind process is what I would advocate for as president of Colorado United.
Kenny, can I ask you, though? I mean, colleges, obviously, they care about grades and SAT scores, but they also are filling universities of people, human beings who have other factors that they bring to the table. Why is it not okay for them to consider those things?
I want to come back to this real quick. He is making the argument for merit. And she's saying, well, what about how much money they make? They want to just change the way they go out and make these decisions so they can get to the same answer. And that's exactly what they're going to do here. They are going to try to find a new way to get to the same answer. And it's all about race. It's just a question of how they get there. That's what she's talking about. She's an activist. So is he. She's pretending to be a journalist. He's an activist. She doesn't know what the hell she's talking about. His group just won this case. And now here she is again trying to make the argument, but shouldn't we have more people on this campus that look like the people in the real world? Well, yeah, if they can get onto the campus and succeed, they absolutely should. Let's see what he has to say about that.
I'm saying if you're going to consider those things, you should consider them without respect to race.
Sure.
So as you know, a lot of Asian Americans.
I think that's exactly right. But socioeconomic status doesn't. If you take race out of it, let's call it socioeconomic status, where whether or not they grew up wealthy or poor, is that not something that colleges might have an interest in considering?
The reason why you shouldn't consider that is because you should consider the success of an applicant. Because of affirmative action, Black Americans graduate from law school at the bottom 25% of their classes, largely speaking. And we don't want that. We want Black students to succeed. We want every student to succeed, low-income students to succeed. But you have to put them in scenarios, in places where they're likely to succeed. And lowering your standard to admit somebody of a socioeconomic status or race would not help them do that. In fact, it would harm their graduation rate and excellence.
Well, as the case also points out, the standard isn't necessarily lowered because students are all admitted. The question is whether race can be an added consideration, a tipping point in some of these cases.
The standard is lowered. The standard is lowered. As the student merit admissions data shows, an Asian has to score 273 points higher on the SAT to have the same chance of admission as a Black person. So the standard is lowered for Black Americans.
Kenny Xu, thank you for your perspective.
Yeah, she has no idea what she's talking about. She's wrong. Again, the entire point of it is you lower the standard for some races, you raise the standard for others. That's what affirmative action did in this case. And all she's wanting to know is how can we get the same thing that's happening with affirmative action to happen in another way. Now, socioeconomic status, I think I could be convinced that actually might be a way to move forward with some of this, but everything he's saying is still correct. It should be mostly about merit, almost entirely about merit. He makes a really good argument against socioeconomic status, but I could at least listen to that argument because that's not just about something that can't be controlled. And give him credit here for standing his ground, although not too hard when the person on the other side is ill-informed and not ready to have an actual conversation. These guys are great. There's a reason why they won their case, and it is absolutely fantastic. And when you hear people talking about this case, remember, they're going to talk about how precedent was overturned and all these other things. Every time a case is overturned at the Supreme Court, a precedent is overturned. It is an incredibly lazy and illogical argument that is made by people who have no idea what they're talking about. It is just a word people have heard on television, and they say, well, what about precedent? Well, what about precedent? Well, in case you haven't noticed, cases involving slaves that upheld that terrible act, they relied on what? Precedent. And when they were overturned, that was overturning precedent. I know this, you know this, they know this, but they only know a few legal words, so these are the ones they throw out. Probably it might be an affirmative action issue in the hiring of some of these people to discuss this stuff, but that's a conversation for another day. This guy's a winner. The reporter is a loser, and he has bested her. She had no interest in discussing the actual case, just repeatedly saying, you know what we should do? We should let more affirmative action folks into the university. How can we do that without calling it affirmative action? And the answer is it's going to be a lot harder. The socioeconomic conversation probably going to take place. But he's right. Merit should matter. We shouldn't punish people for being successful. We shouldn't punish people for having a culture that rewards trying harder, studying more, all these things. We shouldn't punish people for that. She advocates doing that, which shouldn't be much of a surprise because she's on CNN and she is going to need people to grade her on a curve.